Welcome to the Silent Thinking Podcast, a space to slow down, breathe, and reconnect. Today I'm reading from When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister by Dave Roberts and Patty Furino. Just listen and let the stillness support you. Part 2, Chapter 6, Life in a Multidimensional Universe. Our friendship continued to evolve. I was intellectually stimulated, personally empowered, and willing to examine all that I believed about how the world operated, question it, and modify my frame of reference. I was ready and willing to ponder the depth of our human experience, an experience I began to realize transcended empirically based principles. During the course of my spiritual exploration, I received an email in April of 2013 from a friend who recommended a book called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers by Annie Kagan. It was highly unusual for her to email me out of the blue with book recommendations. Curious, I checked out the book on Amazon and discovered that it was released on March the 1st, 2013, my daughter's 10th year anniversary. I immediately ordered it without hesitation. This book resonated deeply with me, and not just because of the date that it was released. In life, Billy had danced with addiction, and after his passing evolved into the wise spirit communicating wisdoms from the afterlife to his sister Annie. As a former addictions counselor, I had long been aware addiction did not define the totality of a person's existence. It was something they did, it wasn't who they were. Billy's role as a wise spirit to his sister validated this. He was not only sharing his newfound spiritual wisdom, his messages served to help destigmatize addiction. Many of the spiritual truths that Billy shared spoke to me, but this one really hit home. When you realize that other dimensions exist, you'll never think of life, death, yourself, or the universe in the same way again. Patty and I talked about books she discovered on her own and from her years studying in the seminary. She introduced me to some, hoping they would support the integration of psychology and spirituality, with topics varying from ancient wisdoms to quantum mechanics of healing. There were plenty of new categories for me to discover. She shared some amazing stories of how different books found their way into her collection. The experiences she revealed sounded almost magical, leaving me naive. I never questioned anything Patty shared, especially when spirit was coming through. Everything we discussed expanded my perspective and stimulated my intellectual curiosity. We tapped into the wisdom of highly evolved beings whose concern was the growth of humanity while empowering the creation of a peaceful planet. Every conversation had some aspect of spiritual growth attached. Every book, every teaching Pat shared inspired me to do more research. With every investigation, I discovered another piece of truth and a part of myself that was previously hidden from me. Together we examined extraordinary events that are possible in a human's existence. I embarked on the road to self-discovery, which was thought-provoking and at times messy. I discovered that the road to awareness is not shrouded with effortless enlightenment. Revelation isn't accompanied by beautiful harp and or trumpet music with an all-powerful, omnipresent celestial being proclaiming, "You got this." Spiritual growth is at times challenging because we are called to examine parts of the human experience that are uncomfortable and painful. I obtained first-hand knowledge of how emotionally and physically draining spiritual work can be after Patty experienced a very disturbing encounter with a spirit during a visit to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American Indian, NMAI, on February 21st, 2011. Pat's daughter, Kim, lived in Woodbridge, Virginia, which is a few minutes south of Washington, D.C. Kim knew of her mom's interest in Native American cultures and their spiritual practices. On this particular weekend, she made plans with her parents to visit the NMAI. A pamphlet that Patty picked up described the museum as one of the world's most expensive collections of Native American objects, photographs, artifacts, and media. The NMAI is dedicated to bring Native voices to life throughout its contemplative exhibitions and colorful activities. Little did she realize how powerful and life-altering those voices could be. Patty called me distressed the Monday after she returned from Virginia, explaining that an unidentified spirit stepped into her body, just as my daughter Jeannine did. She informed me that as she walked through the museum, studying the exhibits, a profound feeling of sadness ran through her. She shared feelings and thoughts that consumed her in great detail. Patty was appealed seeing personal items and bones that had been unearthed on display. She recalled standing in a room filled with items from the Lakota and became overcome with anger towards the white men who showed no respect for their culture. Patty described a frustration over the massacre of Native people by the white men who wanted to take possession of their land. Her innermost thoughts were of absolute disgust with the American government. How could our government believe by creating this museum they were doing something exceptional for the indigenous people, who they tried to exterminate? But continued and expressed how the intense thoughts filling her head were inconsistent with her personal views. What struck me about Patty's description is that she was speaking directly from the perspective of an indigenous person, and not the perspective of a second-generation white middle-class woman of Polish descent. Patty believed the spirits of Native Americans became one with her as she walked through the NMAI and continued throughout the next museum. She recalled in detail her thoughts while visiting the Air and Space Museum. Patty revealed that her opposition and disappointment with Americans and their self-proclaimed greatness was now growing stronger. Patty described feelings of being one with generations of pain and victimization that Native American cultures endured at the hands of these new humans settling on the land all around them. At one point, she looked at her husband and daughter with total disgust and extreme frustration, sickened by the pride Americans exhibited with their space exploration. Our conversation went on. As Pat stated, Americans couldn't figure out how to live peacefully on this planet with fellow human beings. Yet they're trying to travel to other planets. As the day progressed, Patty explained how she became quiet and lost in her own thoughts. She felt for the first time in her life she truly understood the plight and reasons for the unresolved anger of Native American people. Patty went on to further recount the situation back at her daughter's apartment that evening. She reported that her thoughts were infused by a spirit who embodied the essence of both a Native American and an African American man. Patty stated this spirit seemed to become her identity, as she remembered being up the entire night, surfing the internet, looking for volunteer service opportunities in Africa. She recalls being consumed with finding a way out of her family situation. Suddenly they became strangers to her. Pat shared many details of how emotional the situation became. She described a particularly intense moment when Marco looked straight in her eyes, grabbed her shoulders, shook her, and yelled, "Whoever you are, you need to leave her body now. I want my wife back." Shortly thereafter, Marco demanded she go out to the car and wait for him as he needed to get her out of there. He quickly packed their belongings and they headed back home. As Pat described the scene, I thought back and empathized with Marco's feeling of being powerless, reminiscent of my exact feelings dealing with my daughter Jeannine's illness. Patty told me the next thing she remembers was awakening in the back seat covered by the blanket. She took the blanket off and sat up feeling more like herself. She began the conversation with Marco by simply asking, "How did you know it wasn't me?" He responded, "There was something in the way your eyes looked at me and Kim. You were emotionally detached from us. I know how much you love us. Your eyes were empty." Both Pat and Marco were quite concerned about this uncharacteristic behavior. She climbed into the front seat and began discussing necessary steps to figure out what transpired the day before and why. Patty suggested to Marco that I could potentially help, especially since my background is in psychology, and we shared a prior experience when Jeannine's spirit showed up the weekend I was on Long Island. What struck me most about our conversation is one of her observations was a direct quote from a book I was in the midst of reading by Leonard Peltier, Prison Writings, My Life is a Sundance. I recently became familiar with the challenges of this Native American elder after hearing his name mentioned in a song on YouTube called Crazy Life by Toad the Wet Sprocket. Leonard Peltier is a Native American of Lakota and Dakota descent. He was found guilty in the shooting of two Federal Bureau of Investigation FBI agents during a 1975 shootout on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment for first-degree murder in 1977. His conviction has been the subject of much controversy, and though he remains in federal prison, many feel, including myself, he's innocent and should be released. Various other governments, dignitaries, and human rights organizations from around the world have also called for Leonard's release. Patty had no idea I was reading a book about the Native American elder as she was visiting a Native American museum. I shared the story of Leonard's plight and some of the details of his book. Patty immediately grabbed her own laptop and searched for information about him. I remember the excitement when the first article she read about Leonard was from an African American Native people publication. We truly felt that we were being connected and guided by spirit for a greater reason. Patty was grateful. I witnessed her experience without judgment, explaining she felt safe sharing these details after knowing me only a few months. She believed we were supposed to manage this challenge together. We discussed her experience extensively, and we both believe with empathy comes great responsibility. Patty's experience was not just about personal spiritual growth. There was a greater purpose being presented to us. She tapped into the multigenerational trauma of 2 different cultures. We concluded that Leonard's release would be a significant step the American government needs to take in order to make amends with the indigenous people of this land. Sharing publicly the intense feelings of the experience has always filled Patty with fear. We hope and pray by sharing Patty's experience, it will bring attention to his unjust imprisonment. We continually pray that a new chapter in Leonard's life will manifest, one that brings him freedom and time back to his homeland with his nation and family. Patty explained that prior to disclosing what took place in Virginia, she was fearful of discussing this type of experience with anyone else because of how she would be perceived. I expressed my unconditional belief in her Virginia experience and was honored to be witness to her ongoing spiritual growth. This minister was so grateful that this psychology professor was truly present and supportive as she continued to share personal experiences from other points in her life. Because of my background in psychology, I could have viewed Patty's behavior as being symptomatic of schizophrenia, unspecified psychotic disorder, or dissociative identity disorder. Prior to Jeannine's death, I would have attempted to place a diagnostic label on her Virginia experience. However, those labels never occurred to me. Patty had no personal history of brain health disorders. She was logical, grounded, and tethered to reality. What further convinced me of the reality of Patty's Virginia experience was the previously mentioned synchronicity with Leonard's story. In addition, Patty was coherent during her phone call, explaining her experience with total understanding and insight. Patty's experience inspired questions that challenged the way that I assess human behavior. Here are just a few of those questions. Can we have a true understanding of behavior without the use of diagnostic labels? What if the experience that Patty had and others like her have had were not a sign of abnormality, but simply their multidimensional way of interacting with the worlds around them? Can certain behaviors, which were once viewed as abnormal, now be viewed as an advanced spiritual awareness? Do all of us have the ability to tap into a higher sense of awareness without previous psychic ability? If we choose to share those experiences with others, particularly those who view the world from only a scientific perspective, will it be heard or dismissed? My belief is that Patty was chosen by Native American, African American spirits in Virginia as a vessel for their message because of her integrity and strong connection to both cultures. After much investigation, I perceive those in the spirit world will choose individuals with only the highest honor and integrity to be a conduit. For those that do not understand the connection to spirit, they may view this behavior as abnormal and needing to medicate it. In the past, I might have shared a similar perspective. I was now beginning to understand that my perceptions of Pat's spiritual encounters were based on my growing awareness that other dimensions do in fact exist. It is possible to connect with an entity who desires another human being to be a conduit for their experience. Pat and I continued to discuss her experience in Virginia for a month afterwards and what she learned from it. She had a new understanding of the anger and resentment indigenous and African American people had toward those with white skin. On February 27, 2011, 6 days after her visit to Virginia, Patty sent me an email containing her letter of intent for a vision quest she undertook facilitated by Sparrow Heart. Patty explained that a vision quest is a traditional Native American journey undertaken to help a person find clarity of her place in the world. Pat traveled to Death Valley, Nevada in March of 2007 and spent 4 days and 4 nights fasting alone in the desert. She felt it was a way to align with the Master Jesus as he spent 40 days and nights alone in the desert in prayer, finding greater clarity of his place in the world. Pat's letter of intent was powerful, impactful, and written with great focus and purpose. 4 years prior to her spiritual experience in Virginia, Pat clearly states her intention in the last paragraph of her letter of intent, and in doing so provided me with greater insight into the events that unfolded at NMAI. In conclusion, I state my intent to surrender the fears that hinder my growth for the next chapter of my life. I embrace with the grace of Swan all that great mystery feels. I'm ready to accept during and after my experience at my Death Valley Vision Fast. I will do my best to pay attention to all parts of me and use all gifts with honor. I know the journey will have the darkness as well as light-filled energy. I am preparing to endure all that is brought to me with trust. We could now see there was a reason she needed to feel those emotions. We discussed how there was a greater purpose in becoming a conduit for centuries of injustice and oppression. She became an empath for the long history of pain and anguish, which continues to be carried from generation to generation. Pat would talk about the importance of how the mistreatment of these people cannot be forgotten or erased. She believed healing can start through acknowledgement and empathy of their pain, and in the process begin to set the stage for a healing transformation of our country. Patty would declare how this time of new understanding and peace was predicted in holy books in different religions. She would state with conviction that it is now the time in our planet's evolution to empower the next generation toward creating a better world. We must begin to look beyond the book cover of our fellow human beings, look to stand in witness of each other's story. It would mean a world full of people from all walks of life, honoring the right of everyone to live with dignity. She would point out the process has already begun with expanding technologies and ease of communicating virtually across the planet. Patty further explained that the younger generations are more in tune and many have the same gift for connecting to the universal intelligence. She would routinely remark that society must be cognizant of not diagnosing, labeling, and then medicating intuitive behavior that is perceived as abnormal. As we explored this topic, I became more in alignment with Patty's point of view. During some conversation, she would pontificate about how to empower this next generation to use their awareness to help each other. Words seemed to come through her, like they were being fed by some great master of prophet. In my opinion, Patty was not someone who needed the guidance of a psychologist. She was clear, focused, and accepted the wisdom of higher voices, inspiring and directing her every move. Though Patty didn't need my guidance, she repeatedly told me it was important for me to witness her path and provide some grounded inspiration along the way. Was there a mission she was being called to embrace? What role was I called to play in it? Only time would tell what the future would reveal to us. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. If this brought you peace, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need a little stillness too. Until next time, keep listening inward.